What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to be doing another DC Dual Force tier list. Today is going to be a tier list of all of the Ultimate cards in the game. I'm recording this on October 15th, so if there happens to be a new Ultimate release between now and when this video is released, obviously that Ultimate will not be included on this tier list. So this is my general baseline of how I am judging this stuff. S tier is basically, if you have this card, it goes in your deck of that color, more or less. Sometimes we'll exclude some extreme examples, but, in general, to be an S tier, you have to, basically go in every single deck of that faction. A is either you go in close to every deck, but not every single one, or you are so good in the couple of decks you go in that you deserve to be up here. So, a top tier, card for control and mid-range that's bad in aggro, but it's really good in control and mid-range, could make it in the A tier. B is, solid, probably run it in a good amount of decks. It's not going to win you games. It's not going to, do anything super crazy. Maybe it needs some support to really shine, or maybe it's, too slow, things like that. C is, got some potential, not the greatest, though, or, this card needs some things to change or some additional support to really be able to play. And D is don't really want to run this card in my deck. Not the best card, that sort of thing. So let's get things started off here. And I want to give an example of what I believe is a true S tier card. And I think there's a couple true S tier cards. But the first one that I wanted to talk about is the Riddler. I think Riddler is just your quintessential S tier card. He has incredible stats for a bronze at 2/4. He has an ability that is guaranteed to trigger at least once, which means you're getting guaranteed value from his ability, and the longer he sticks around, the more of a problem he becomes. Yes, sometimes your opponent is going to be given 3 horrible choices, so you get a horrible card, but sometimes having a horrible card is just better than not having a play. And, on average, you have to assume that the cards are going to average out to at least okay. Maybe not great, but you're going to get some okay cards, some additional options. Between the ability, the value, the body, this guy just goes into basically any tier, any deck. It's good for aggro because he's got a good stat line. Obviously, mid-range, great stat line, value, ability, control, trades well in the early game, gives you more resources, the value. He goes into everything. He's just really, really, really solid. And now there's actually a couple other, pairings that are pretty similar to that. We'll go over some more of them over time. But next up, we're going to talk about something that I think is on the lower end. And unlike the leader tier list, I'm not necessarily going to rank these in the tiers. So, being to the left of S tier and being to the right of S tier doesn't mean, the Riddler is better than whatever else winds up here. I think that's a little bit too much splitting hairs for Ultimate cards. So we're probably not going to do that this time around. Next up, we have... This is Speed Force right here. This card readies your recruits that attacked this turn. This card is just D tier in my opinion. It's just too slow. You need to have a board. They need to all have attacked. And then enough of them need to survive where you can play a gold card to let them attack again. That just seems iffy, to be honest. Very slow. The only thing that you could maybe, really see good value for would be if you had a bunch of, cheap or free speed recruits you can play, or, if you had 1 or 2 Carapax that you had hit with Batman Who Laughs, so they had Flurry, and then you could, Speed Force to make your Carapax attack again, so it gets 4 attacks per turn. But, all of these are very niche, borderline. You could probably just be doing something better applications. That being said, Speed Force is an interesting combo card. There may come a day where this guy could be pretty solid. I just don't think that day is today or really anytime soon, to be completely honest. Next up, we're going to look at Deathstroke. I think Deathstroke is a solid A-ish tier card. I think he fits into a lot of Anarchy decks. I don't think necessarily every single one. But he's one that I think is top of S tier or top of A tier, borderline S tier. His ability is really strong. You can get a lot of face damage in just by killing a recruit, letting him go face, killing a recruit, letting him go face. He has lethal, so you can remove really big threats with him. You just kind of have to have the right board state. So you need to have a board, they need to have a board, and you need to be able to trade into something to really trigger him. But really, if he was any easier to trigger or any more strong, he'd probably be a guaranteed S tier card. But honestly, near the top of A tier is just really strong for Deathstroke regardless. That is nothing to shake a stick at. Next up, we're going to take a look at Massacre. Massacre, I think, is like top of B, bottom of A type card. You know, you run it as Control Tyranny because, you know, more removal is a good thing. But it also kind of got, I don't want to say power crept because there is a condition on Ladama, but like you can run 2 copies of Ladama that clear just your opponent's side of the board, whereas Massacre is an ultimate that kills everything. The benefit of Massacre is you don't need to have played 2 other golds first. So I think Massacre is like a top of B, bottom of A type thing. I'm going to leave Massacre in A for now. We'll come back to it. Maybe bump it down if, you know, things change. Next up, we've got Helmet of Fate. Helmet of Fate is an interesting card because in general, like, magical spell decks don't even necessarily run it. I think it is a solid card, but the fact that it's a bronze card, you want to be playing your bronzes earlier. But if you play this early, it really is nothing besides a cycle. And if you play it late, you probably would rather be playing something other than a bronze card. There are times where you have this card and it can do really well. I don't think this card is like completely hopeless, although I think it's fairly weak. I'd probably put it like bottom of C tier, although there's nothing in C tier right now, so it's going to sit in C tier alone. But I do think this is kind of like a bottom of C tier card, maybe top of D tier. Like Helmet of Fate, you typically, like in mid game, you'd rather be doing Constantine things. Late game, you'd rather be doing Morgaine or Giovanni type things. Just Helmet of Fate struggles to really find a spot to really fit into. Highfather. It's a little awkward because, like, if Batman didn't exist and there wasn't a lot of easy ways to ping this aura and then just get rid of him, he'd probably be maybe like a B tier. But I think as he stands, he probably sits in C tier just because there's so many ways to remove him right now. Sometimes, you know, he can come down and just, you have no answer and he just wins the game as a 12-12. But I don't think that's necessarily common enough for him to be much higher. He might be worthy of like a bottom of B tier thing. But just because of how easy it is to pop off auras right now, we're going to bump him down to, you know, let's say top of C tier type thing. Next up, we've got Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness, I think, is just a bit too conditional for what it does. You need to have a damage recruit on the board, and Anarchy doesn't have a lot of resilient recruits. And then after that, you turn it into a leader that has some abilities, could also just die, but he has some charges. I don't think Heart of Darkness is completely, like, devoid of hope. I think it's just a little too conditional for what it does. It might be like a bottom of C, top of D type thing. It's just so, like, iffy. And Anarchy doesn't have a lot of recruits to really trigger this well, and then you have to have it. It's just a really awkward card to pull off. We'll leave it top of D for now, but it might really just be a bottom of C type card. Next up, we've got Jamie. Now, pre-bug fix Jamie was probably S tier as well. And Jamie in general might still be like a S tier type card. However, it does require you to build your deck in a certain way. And what I mean by that is you need to have enough gold cards to where you can have Jamie and a gold card. Or ideally, the high roll is Jamie and Paco on turn 3. But that then involves you running Paco. You probably run Brenda. So it's like a full package you need to really bring out the true strength of Jamie. However, I still think Jamie's incredibly strong, and you can make an argument that he's like bottom of S tier. I don't think he's as auto-include as some of the other cards we're going to have in S tier, because what I consider an auto-include is like you can run Riddler and you need 0 support in your deck. Riddler just goes in, he makes your deck better. Jamie is really, really strong, but you need to build your deck in a certain way to maximize Jamie. Otherwise, he's not as strong as he could be. So I think that warrants bumping Jamie down into top of A tier. Probably by far the strongest A tier card we're going to talk about. But still, I think A tier just because of that fact. Next up, we're going to look at Detective Chimp. Detective Chimp has solid stat line at a 2-3. He has evade, so he has a good keyword, which makes him sticky on the board. Good defensive card. Also, his ability lets you draw a card. as long as you can guess what card is in your opponent's deck. That is a little bit conditional, but in general, I think people's decks are obvious enough, and there's enough solid cards right now that just go into most decks of that color that Chimp is close to a guaranteed card draw. And just in a faction that loves card draw and has a lot of good recruits, Chimp is, I think, an auto-include in any kind of tyranny deck, tactics deck. You basically run him all the time. His ability will get slightly weaker as time goes on, because as there are more good cards and it's harder to identify what deck your opponent is running on turn 1 and 2, this ability will get less consistent. But at least while we're in this initial phase of like core set and a couple other, mini sets, Chimp is still easy enough to guess where I think he's an S tier because the stats, the keyword, and basically a guaranteed card draw. Next up, we're going to take a look at my friend Necron. Necron, I think, is a good example of a card that is not weak, but just doesn't really fit into the landscape of the game right now. He has a couple things working against him. First thing being he has 3 attack, which means he does die to culling, which is a little bit unfortunate, and it probably an edge case, but still having a gold card that dies to culling is rough. On top of that, his ability is a start ability, which means he needs to survive until the start of next turn in order to get some value. And then on top of that, he can only pull from your current pool of dead recruits, which means if you really want to maximize Necron, you need to have, just good recruits in your deck. Otherwise, if you pull back, let's say just like a generic 1/1, that was a lot of hoping and praying for not a lot of outcome. So he has a lot going against him right now. And, in metas where culling isn't played, you still probably could be doing better things on your gold turn than playing Necron and hoping. I don't think he's necessarily a full D tier. I think he's like a strong card or strong potential that just the potential is not realized at the moment. And, the landscape is just not fitting to his abilities. Next up, we're going to take a look at Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan is a 5/5 Green Lantern gold. You can pay a bronze resource to double the power and health of Hal Jordan and a Green Lantern in your hand. Obviously, this is very strong. There's some combo potential. It's a good kind of bomb for your Green Lanterns deck. However, Green Lanterns in general aren't that great, and when Green Lanterns win, they're not usually going into the gold turns. So Hal just kind of is like a solid card that just doesn't really advance his own game plan. Maybe if Green Lantern decks ever get slower, Hal will really shine. But right now, I think he's like decent recruit without a home, more or less. Also, as a gold recruit, you're paying gold plus a bronze to basically play a 10/10. So, like, Highfather is better than that because, yeah, it's a silver, but you're getting a 12/12 with Aura. Also, you're just getting a 10/10 down. It doesn't do anything on the board. So if your opponent just removes this with, lethal recruit or a bigger they are type thing, that's a lot of tempo lost. So he just doesn't really do enough to really be worth it right now. Next up, we're going to take a look at Clark Kent. Clark is a interesting situation because Clark is very easily answered on turn 1 or 2 because, Deimos, Ambush Bug, you have Energy Blast, you have Traumatize, you have Batarangs, you have so many different options to answer a turn 1 Clark Kent that most of the time he just dies if you play him. You wasted a bronze, you wasted a card, and you get no outcome. However, on the occasional chances when Clark does transform, your win percentage probably goes through the roof in terms of like a win percentage gained when transformed. So buffing Clark or changing Clark is really tough because if you make him good, he is a miserable card to play against. But in his current state and the current way the games play out, especially with how popular Tactics is, especially with how popular Energy is, so Energy and Tactics are really popular, those two things just really push the viability of Clark all the way down. I think for now he's in D tier. If Tactics and Energy ever fall out of favor, he may rise into like a C tier, but even then I don't know if he goes much higher than that. Next up, we're going to take a look at the Joker recruit. Joker is an interesting card because, I don't think he's a great it's not that I don't think he's a great option. I think inmates in general have gotten so weak or weaker that they need a high roll to win. And when they do high roll to win, they're usually winning before Joker even comes down to matter. However, Joker's been changed twice now. Now he's a silver. So that's pretty solid. And he also recently got changed where even if you just play him as a 6/3 and your opponent kills him, he does trigger himself now. So I think that stuff altogether warrants Joker being in like a B tier. Maybe it's more of a bottom of B tier. Even though like he doesn't necessarily do the inmates thing that they want to do, which is really just high roll and hope to win. I think he is a strong card, and if inmates continue to ever get a little bit slower into more of the mid-range type thing, Joker's a really strong card. And just in general, a 6/3 that deals 3 to an opposing leader is not terrible. That's an aggressive stat line, 3 additional damage to face guaranteed. It's like a weaker Cupid without the quote-unquote downside. Usually Cupid, you want her downside to be an upside with the discard. But Joker's kind of like Cupid Light. And Cupid's a pretty strong card in my opinion. Next up, we've got Unexpected Help. Gold card that gives you a random leader as long as you only have one leader. So it's gold. It has a pretty steep condition where one of your leaders needs to be dead. You get a random leader from one of those factions, so you're not even guaranteed to get a leader that is useful. I think this card is just very conditional, very iffy. I think it's a D tier card. It's just, you can't really count on it. It's fun, don't get me wrong. It's a lot of fun to mess around with, but it's just not reliable enough to really stick around for you. Next up, we've got Firestorm. I think Firestorm is like a bottom S, top of A type card. Reason being, to really maximize Firestorm, you want to be playing at least a couple of free cards on that turn. So that means pairing your energy leader with like a Batman for free gadgets, or if you're playing Zatanna, keeping a handful of free spells, or if you're playing Shazam, you want to make sure you have some lightning bolts in hand to really maximize your Firestorm. So he needs some setup, but also he does go in like almost every energy deck. So it's like I don't think Firestorm stands on his own as well as, Chimp and Riddler do. But I also don't think he is... I guess he's probably on par with Jamie. If Jamie's an A tier, I think Firestorm is probably an A tier as well. In terms of they both need some setup, but they're both incredibly strong. Both of these, you can make an argument for sure that should be S tier. And maybe they get bumped up at some point, and I won't argue with you at all. But I think these two kind of go hand in hand of like, they need a little bit of support to really hit their true power level. Next up, we've got Mera. Mera's an interesting card. I think she is like a bottom of A tier, top of B tier type thing. A lot of times, Mera just comes out and does nothing, and she dies, and you lost a silver. But also, when Mera does come out and get activated at least once, I feel like your win rate probably goes very, very high. So she's like a, 3/7 is not a bad stat line either. I think maybe she's like a bottom of A type card. She needs a little bit of deck building help, but also if you're playing Might, in general, you're going to be playing enough 5 power cards where you're not really needing to warp your deck to support her. She's just kind of going to be there, and she's going to be very, very strong. Yeah, I think Mera is probably like top of B, bottom of A maybe. Actually, I think I might bump Massacre down to B tier and Mera there. I think that's feeling a little bit better. Next up, we're going to take a look at the Poison Ivy recruit. She has some fun combo potential. She can kill a leader, which is pretty crazy. A very strong ability, but you need to have her on the board. You need to protect her. And then you need to open up a lane for her to hit a leader. There's just a lot of other things that Tyranny could be doing with a gold resource. You have Darkseid down here. You've got Massacre. You've got Ladama now. There's a lot of things that Tyranny can be doing. But also, I don't think Poison Ivy's helpless. I think she's just slow. I think she's more of like a C tier. Depending on the meta, she may bubble to B a little bit, but I think she's kind of a C tier card in general. Next up, we've got Two-Face. I think Two-Face is easy S tier. He goes into basically every single Anarchy deck. His ability is like a no downside ability. 2/2 is okay stats for a bronze. His ability, 50% chance to just flat out kill something, is very strong. 50% chance at worst to draw a card is still pretty strong. 2/2 draw a card is solid. And sometimes it kills something and gets you ahead on the board. He goes into basically any Anarchy deck, just like these other two guys. He needs no support. His power level is just there. I think Two-Face is just easy S tier. Next up, we've got Batmobile. So Batmobile is interesting, and this is probably going to be one of my most controversial placements. Batmobile in Tactics is different than Batmobile in Batman. And I can't just grade Batmobile on the curve of Batman is the only Tactics leader that sees play. I need to look at it across the entire spectrum of Tactics. Which means Batmobile, if we were just looking at Batman, is an S tier card. You're going to play a ton of gadgets probably no matter what. But in a regular Tactics deck, if you're not playing Batman, you're not playing as many gadgets. You might just be playing like Bluebird. Maybe you play Batwing, but in general, you're not playing as many. So that really bumps Batmobile down to like a tier, maybe B tier type card. Batmobile is probably bottom of A tier in Tactics in general, just because getting permanent attack and Hunter is still pretty solid, and Tactics plays enough general gadgets where it's still playable. I just think it goes down a tier because there's other stuff than Batman. If we were just talking Batman leader, I think Batmobile is an S tier card for sure. Next up, we're going to take a look at the Superman Recruit. I think Superman Recruit is another S tier card. I think this card is so good, you probably even see him in aggressive Might decks, and you definitely see him in mid-range, and you absolutely see him in control. 8/8 with shield is pretty solid stats. His ability that makes your leaders invincible means your opponents cannot ignore him. So you could play him in the middle while still having blockers in front of your leaders, and then if they don't have an action to remove him, a lot of times he just wins the game. Even if you can remove him, the stuff they have to spend removing him can sometimes just win you the game. Superman is just, he is the Might card to run. Next up, we're going to take a look at Shazam. I think Shazam is another S tier card. I think Shazam is the energy S tier card. A 7/6 speed is always playable. Good in aggro, good in mid-range, solid in control. You can use it as a removal spell. He has the bonus upside of turning into Billy when he dies. Does he usually transform into Shazam back? No, he's going to get removed most of the time. But just having that little potential for upside is another little bonus. He's playable as a 7/6 with speed, but that little additional bonus of he can potentially transform back, very, very strong, very, very solid. Next up, we've got Bizarro. I think Bizarro is another one of these A tier cards. You can maybe make the argument that he's a top of B tier card because you might not play him as much in control decks, although I still think you could potentially use him as a finisher type of card in a control deck if you've built a solid board. Just kind of flip your opponents and just smack them in the face real quick. I think he's probably pretty comparable to Mera. I think he's like a bottom of A-ish type card. Yeah, he's just solid. And honestly, even if you don't activate his ability, a 9/5 shield is like, okay. Like sometimes you're going to want to use him like that, and that will be very solid. Next up, we've got Green Arrow Recruit. I think this guy is another like stud. You're going to run him in basically every Tactics deck. He does not need any support. His ability is sometimes just game winning. You can clear, between 2 and 4 things in the early to mid game if you set it up properly. And thanks to Tactics having batarangs, you can really often set up the board to be in a state where Green Arrow is just going to completely wipe things out. So that's very strong. He has ambush if he does stick on the board. Yes, he's 5/2, so he's easy to remove. But if your opponent can't remove him immediately, let's say Green Arrow clears the board and they don't have an action to kill Green Arrow, very often Green Arrow is going to kill something that they play every single turn, and he's not going to die because he has ambush. So he clears the board, gets you back ahead on board, and if he doesn't immediately get removed, he keeps you ahead on board until your opponent can either kill him with a leader or an action. Green Arrow is just cracked. We've got 3 cards left. We've got Catwoman up next. I think Catwoman is interesting. She's pretty close to an S tier, but I think she falls in this line of very strong B tier or A tier cards. I'm not going to try and rank all these. They're all just very good. 4-3 with Hidden is like a little bit on the weak side. However, she has Hunter, which means she can dive past blockers to hit your opponent in the face. And her ability of stealing a gold card is like double-edged. You get a gold card, which means you're guaranteed to have a late game play if you get into the late game, depending on what your opponent's playing. And typically your opponent wants to play good cards, so you're going to steal a good card and have a good card to play on your gold turn. On top of that, you're going to steal a good card from your opponent that they want to play, whether that's a combo piece, or if you're playing against Flash Doomsday, you steal their Hellblaze, which means that's one less Hellblaze you have to get hit by, which also reduces their chance of drawing that Hellblaze. So while Catwoman's stats are a little bit weaker, her ability to just kind of sometimes not quite win you the game, but kind of almost win you the game, has her as a solid A tier card. Next up, we've got Darkseid. I think Darkseid is another S tier card. He might be like top of A in aggro implications, but honestly, Tyranny doesn't really do aggro, and he's so good in mid-range and control that he's everywhere. Once you have Darkseid, you just kind of always run him. 7-9, pretty good stats. His ability to delete a spot on the board is crazy, because A, it's removal, so you can get rid of something huge. You can kill that Allfather once you ping off the aura. But on top of that, that means your opponent can't play stuff in that slot anymore. So if you destroy the slot in front of a leader, they can't ever block for their leader again for the rest of the game. There is no way to undo that board destruction. And that's the only ability in the game that does that right now. So Darkseid, easy S tier for Tyranny. Finally, we've got the Batman Recruit. Again, this is the kind of card that is probably higher if you were to consider just Batman. But in tactics as a whole, you have to kind of judge that. And I think that makes him like an A tier. You can maybe even put Batman into B tier. Purely because a gold that you need to have gadgets for outside of Batman is not as strong. However, he has really good keywords with Ambush and Hidden and Hunter. So he can go face, he can trade really well, he can snipe things on the board. And if you have gadgets, the draw is like a additional bonus. I don't really know where I want Batman to sit, because like in other tactics decks, he's probably like a B, but in Batman, he's probably like an A to an S. So we're going to put him bottom of A, kind of floating in between A and B. Taking a look at this, B tier is very small. But honestly, I don't know what cards I would feel good about bumping into B tier. Like, you could argue maybe Highfather, but he's so slow. And honestly, all of these cards are too good to be in B tier. The only ones I'd really make an argument for is like Mera and Batman, that maybe they could go down here and make things a little bit more even. But honestly, I don't think so. I think these cards are played in most of the decks of their colors, even if they're not the strongest cards out there. So I think this is my list. I think I'm going to lock this in. I think, 7 S tier cards. I think I feel pretty solid about that. I think we have one in each color too, right? Tyranny, Tactics, Anarchy, Might, and Energy. Yeah, I think so. So that every single faction has at least one S tier ultimate. Tactics has 2. Tactics also has the most ultimates and does not have an ultimate below tier A tier. Although you can make an argument that Batman is B tier. But if Batman is your weakest ultimate, Batman or Batmobile, if those are what we're talking about for your weakest ultimate, you're probably doing pretty well for yourself. Weakest ultimate distribution probably goes to Tyranny. They've got Darkseid and Riddler, so they have 2 S tiers as well. Only other faction with 2 S tiers. But then they've got a B and 2 Cs. Might actually is probably going through it as well. They've got an S, they've got an A, but then they have a C and 2 Ds. So Might probably has the worst of it. Although Might has very high quality of their 2 good cards. But yeah, that's my list. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Where you agree, where you disagree, what cards you would bump up and down. Looking forward to hearing your guys' feedback. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.